Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jacob Moonrunner, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. I've seen bear attacks, rescued lost hikers, and pulled bodies from rivers. I thought I knew every kind of danger these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. People always ask about my last name. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to tell stories about spirits that walked at night. Some places hold on to the dead, she'd say, rocking in her old chair, and some dead don't want to let go. I never believed her stories until October 1979, when I walked into Screaming Hollow. I'm 44 now, married to Sarah for 16 years, with 4 kids who think their dad is some kind of hero. I used to be military police before I became a ranger. I've handled 1,247 emergency calls in my career, and I've never lost anyone on my watch. That record almost changed in Screaming Hollow. The hollow sits between 2 ridges, each rising 3,000 feet on either side. There's only one road in, and it's 25 miles from the nearest town. Most people avoid it. The place got its name back in the 1800s when settlers started hearing screaming sounds echoing from the valley. Nobody could ever find what was making the noise. I'd been there before, of course. Quick patrols, checking on campers who got lost. But I'd never spent a whole night there. The place always felt wrong somehow. The air sat too still, and the trees looked dead even in summer. There were pools of black water that never seemed to dry up, and mist that hung around even on clear days. I blamed it all on the geography. The hollow was narrow and deep, like a bowl tipped on its side. Sound bounced around weird, and the sun barely reached the bottom. That October morning, dispatch radioed me about 3 missing college students, geology majors from the state university. They'd been studying rock formations in the hollow for a class project. Their professor expected them back 2 days ago. Last contact was Tuesday morning, the dispatcher told me. Their parents are starting to call. I loaded up my truck with search gear and drove out to the hollow. The morning was cold, maybe 45 degrees, with thick fog rolling through the trees. My breath made little puffs as I hiked down to where the students had set up camp. I found their site right away. 3 tents arranged in a neat triangle, sleeping bags laid out but never used, a cold fire pit with wood stacked nearby, ready to light. Their backpacks sat exactly where they'd been left, food still packed inside. It looked like they'd just vanished right after setting up. But it was their notebooks that got my attention. Sarah's always telling me I should read more, so I flipped through their research notes. These kids were smart. They'd been documenting what they called unusual acoustic phenomena in the hollow. One girl, Karen Wu, had written pages about how whispers seemed to carry for miles, while normal talking got swallowed up by the trees. Day 1, recorded echo tests at 14 different locations. Sound behavior doesn't match expected patterns for this terrain type. Day 2, Mike thinks we're imagining things, but I swear I heard someone calling for help around midnight. Checked the whole area. Nobody there. Day 3. Something's wrong with this place. The limestone formations are creating some kind of natural amphitheater, but that doesn't explain the voices. I'd been a ranger long enough to know that missing people usually meant one of 3 things. They got lost, they got hurt, or they got stupid and wandered off trail. But reading Karen's notes, seeing how carefully they'd documented everything, these kids didn't seem stupid. I called in their location and started a systematic search pattern. The hollow was only about 2 miles long and half a mile wide at the bottom. Thick woods on both sides, a little creek running down the middle. If 3 people were lost in there, I should be able to find some trace of them. That's when I started noticing things that didn't fit. Animal tracks that stopped in the middle of clearings, like whatever made them just disappeared. Birds that wouldn't fly over certain parts of the hollow. My radio kept picking up static, and underneath the static I could swear I heard distant screaming. My grandmother's voice kept echoing in my head. Some places hold on to the dead. I pushed the thought away. I was a trained professional with 2 decades of experience. I didn't have time for old stories. But as the sun started setting and the mist began rising from those black pools, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in Screaming Hollow was watching me. The temperature dropped fast when the sun disappeared behind the ridges. I'd set up a base camp near the students' site, planning to continue searching at first light. My radio crackled with static every few minutes, and dispatch kept asking for updates I didn't have. "Still searching," I told them. "No sign of the missing students. Weather's getting bad down here." But it wasn't really bad weather, just fog and cold. The weird part was how quiet everything got after dark. No owl calls, no rustling leaves, no insect sounds. Even the little creek seemed to run quieter. It was like the whole hollow was holding its breath. I was checking my gear when I heard it. A woman's voice, clear as day, calling, "Help me, please, someone help me." I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound. "Hello, I'm a park ranger. Where are you?" The voice came again, but from a different direction. "Help! I'm hurt!" I spun around, sweeping my light across the trees. "Keep talking. I'll find you." For the next 10 minutes, I chased that voice all over the hollow. Every time I got close, it moved somewhere else. Sometimes it sounded like it was right next to me. Other times it echoed from the ridges above. But I never saw anyone. That's when I found the first strange thing. A set of footprints in the soft mud by the creek, small feet, like a woman's. But they didn't make sense. The prints went about 20 yards, then just stopped. Not like someone jumped to rocks or changed direction. They just ended, right in the middle of a clear patch of mud. I knelt down with my flashlight, studying the tracks. The prints were deep and clear, like someone had been running. But the last print was deeper than the others, with claw marks scraped in the mud around it, like someone had been grabbed and dragged up into the air. "Just wind patterns," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "Sound bounces weird in this hollow, and animals could have messed up the tracks." But my hand was shaking as I wrote notes in my logbook. I was heading back to camp when I saw her. Just for a second, caught in the edge of my flashlight beam. A woman in a white dress, standing between two dead trees about 50 yards away. She was there, clear as anything, then gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I ran to the spot but found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had been there. Just two dead oak trees and empty air. I called out again. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. Are you injured?" Silence. Then, from somewhere above me in the trees, a sound that made my blood freeze. Screaming. Not human screaming, something else. It started low and rose to a pitch that hurt my ears, then cut off all at once. My radio erupted in static. Through the noise, I could swear I heard voices, multiple voices, all talking at once, too garbled to understand. I adjusted the frequency, trying to clear the signal, but it just got worse. That's when I remembered the students' recording equipment. I'd seen it in their camp, but hadn't thought to check it. I hurried back and found their digital recorder still sitting by their coal. Fire pit. The device had been running for 4 days straight. I rewound it to their last entries and listened. At first, just normal college kid chatter. Mike joking around, Karen explaining geology stuff, Tom complaining about the cold. But on the second day, their voices got quieter, more serious. "There it is again," Karen whispered on the recording. "You guys hear that?" A long pause, then Mike's voice. "What the hell was that?" "Sounded like someone screaming," Tom said. "Should we check it out?" Karen asked. "Hell no," Mike replied. "We're getting out of here in the morning." But they hadn't left in the morning. The recording showed they'd stayed another day. And on the third day, things got really strange. I fast-forwarded through hours of dead air until I found voices again. But something was wrong. It was still Karen talking, but she sounded different. Older, sadder. "The fever's getting worse," she said in a voice that didn't quite sound like hers. "Ma told me the sickness would take me, but I didn't want to believe her. The other children are already gone. Mary died yesterday and little Samuel the day before." I checked the timestamp. This was recorded 3 days ago, but Karen was talking like she was dying of some old-time disease. And she was using words that didn't fit, calling her mother Ma, talking about children who weren't part of their group. The recording went on. They're digging the hole now, a big hole for all of us. They say it's easier than individual graves, but it ain't right. We should be buried proper, with our names on stones. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the recorder. This wasn't Karen Wu, geology student from the State University. This was someone else, talking through Karen's voice about being buried in a mass grave. I thought about those local stories, the ones I'd never paid attention to. Screaming Hollow had other names over the years. Fever Valley, Death's Bowl. In 1847, a cholera outbreak hit a settlement somewhere in these mountains. The whole community died in 2 weeks, the survivors. Orers from neighboring towns were so scared of the disease they buried the dead in a mass grave and never marked it. The recording continued, but now it was Mike's voice sounding like an old man. 23 years I worked this land, built my cabin with my own hands, raised 4 sons here, but the sickness came with the spring rains, and now we're all dying. Then Tom, speaking in a child's voice, Mama, Mama, I can't breathe. It's so dark in here. Why did they put us in the ground? We're not all dead yet. The recording cut to static, then silence. I sat there in the dark, staring at the device. Either these college kids were playing the most elaborate prank in history, or something in Screaming Hollow had gotten inside their heads. A new sound drifted across the hollow. Multiple voices, crying and wailing in harmony. The sound I'd been hearing on my radio, but clearer now. It wasn't just screaming. It was mourning. The sound of people grieving for the dead. I looked up at the ridges surrounding me, feeling suddenly very small and very alone. My grandmother's words came back. Some places hold on to the dead, and some dead don't want to let go. For the first time in 21 years as a ranger, I was genuinely scared. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. Wind in the trees, something splashing in the creek, my own breathing. When dawn finally came, I was ready to call for backup and get the hell out of there. But first, I had to find those students. I spent the morning searching areas I'd missed the day before. The limestone caves on the north side of the hollow, the thick brush near the water. Anywhere 3 people might be hiding or trapped. I called their names until my voice went hoarse, but got no answer except my own echo bouncing off the ridges. Around noon, I found Karen's field notebook. It was sitting on a rock beside the creek, like someone had placed it there for me to find. The pages were damp but readable. Her handwriting got stranger as the entries went on. October 15th. The acoustic properties of this location are unlike anything in the literature. Sound doesn't behave according to normal physical laws here. October 16th. Mike says I'm getting obsessed, but I know something's wrong. The temperature variations don't match weather patterns. Some spots are 30 degrees colder than others with no logical explanation. October 17th. Found what looks like depression in the ground near the big oak trees, roughly 20 feet by 40 feet, maybe 3 feet deep. Could be natural erosion, but the shape is too regular. Tom thinks it's an old foundation, but there's no record of buildings in this area. That caught my attention. I hiked over to the oak trees where I'd seen the woman in white. Sure enough, there was a rectangular depression in the ground, almost completely hidden by dead leaves and overgrowth. The size and shape were exactly what Karen had described. I knelt down and started clearing away the debris. About 2 feet down, my fingers hit something hard. I brushed away more dirt and found myself looking at human bones. A skull, then another one. Then more bones than I wanted to count. My radio crackled. Unit 7, this is dispatch. What's your status? I keyed the mic with shaking hands. Dispatch, I need backup and the county coroner out here. I've found human remains. Copy that. How many bodies? I looked down at the partially uncovered grave. I don't know yet. A lot. While I waited for backup, I kept reading Karen's notebook. The entries got weirder as they went on. October 18th. The voices are getting stronger. They're not hallucinations. I've recorded them, but they're speaking through us now. When I talk, sometimes it's not my voice coming out. I remember things that never happened to me. Walking across this hollow in a long dress, carrying a baby that was burning with fever. watching my husband dig graves for our neighbors, the taste of sickness in my mouth. Mick, and Tom are changing too. Mike keeps talking about his crops failing, but he's a geology major from Pittsburgh. Tom cries at night and calls for his mama, but he's 22 years old. The last entry was dated yesterday. They want us to stay. The dead here, they're lonely. They've been waiting so long for company, for people to remember them. They don't mean to hurt us, but they're so desperate for contact. I understand now why people disappear in this hollow. They don't leave because they can't. The dead won't let them go. After that, the handwriting changed. It looked like a child's scrawl. I want my mama. I want to go home. But they put us in the ground and it's dark and cold and I can't breathe. I closed the notebook and tried to radio dispatch again, but all I got was static. The same static that had been plaguing me since I arrived, but now I could hear the voices underneath more clearly. Men, women, children, all talking at once, all begging for help, for someone to remember them, to not leave them alone. That's when the screaming started again. Not the distant wailing I'd heard before, but close, right behind me. I spun around and saw them, dozens of people in old-fashioned clothes standing at the edge of the clearing. Men in work shirts and suspenders, women in long dresses, children in patched overalls. They were translucent, like looking through dirty water, but clear enough that I could see their faces. They all looked sick. Pale skin, dark circles around their eyes, the hollow look of people dying from disease. And they were all staring at me with desperate, hungry expressions. One woman stepped forward. She was young, maybe 25, with brown hair pinned up under a bonnet. "Please," she said, and her voice was the same one I'd heard calling for help. "Please don't leave us. We've been alone so long." "I'm here to help," I managed to say. But I need to find 3 students, college kids who went missing." "They're with us now," an old man said, moving to stand beside the woman. "They understand. They remember what it was like before, when this valley was full of life." "Where are they?" A little girl, maybe 8 years old, pointed toward the caves. "They're sleeping, but they'll wake up soon, and then they'll be like us, forever." I started backing away, but more spirits appeared behind me. I was surrounded by maybe 50 dead people, all watching me with those hungry, desperate eyes. "You can stay too," the woman said. "You have Cherokee blood. You understand the old ways, the spirits of the land. You know we deserve better than this mass grave, better than being forgotten." She was right about the Cherokee blood, but how could she know that? I'd never told anyone in the hollow about my grandmother. "We died of cholera in 1847, the old man said. 47 souls in 2 weeks. They buried us here like animals, all jumbled together with no prayers, no marker, no respect. We can't rest until we're properly honored." The little girl tugged at my jacket. I could feel her touch, cold as ice water. "Will you help us, mister? Will you make sure people remember our names?" I wanted to run, but I was surrounded. And despite my fear, I felt sorry for them. Being forgotten after death, lying in an unmarked grave for over a century, it was a terrible fate. "I'll try," I said. "But first I need to find those students. They have families who love them." The spirits looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation. Finally the woman nodded. "They're in the deep cave," she said. "But hurry. The longer they stay, the harder it becomes for them to leave. Soon, they won't remember their old lives at all." I looked toward the limestone caves, then back at the spirits. They were already starting to fade as the sun moved higher. "Remember us," the old man said as he disappeared. "We were people once. We had names. We mattered." I ran for the caves, hoping I wasn't too late to save the students, and wondering if I was already too late to save myself. The cave system was bigger than I'd expected. What looked like a single opening from outside branched into multiple tunnels leading deep into the ridge. My flashlight beam didn't reach the back walls, and my voice echoed strangely when I called out, "Karen, Mike, Tom, can you hear me?" Nothing but my own echo. I picked the widest tunnel and started deeper into the mountain. The temperature dropped with every step, and my breath started making fog clouds. The walls were covered with limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls, and water dripped steadily from the ceiling. I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I heard singing. A woman's voice, soft and sad, echoing from somewhere ahead. I followed the sound deeper into the cave until I reached a large chamber. All 3 students were there. They sat in a circle on the cave floor, their backs against the stone walls. Their eyes were open, but they stared at nothing. Karen was the one singing, an old hymn I remembered from my grandmother's funeral. But her voice sounded different, older and weaker. "Karen?" I knelt beside her and shook her shoulder. "Karen, it's the park ranger. I'm here to get you out." She turned to look at me, but her eyes didn't focus right. "Ranger? Oh, you mean like the soldiers that used to patrol the territory. My pa was a ranger in the Indian Wars, before the sickness came." This wasn't Karen Wu talking. Someone else was speaking through her mouth, using her voice. I checked her pulse, weak but steady. She was alive, but barely there. Mike was muttering to himself about crop failures and debt. Tom kept rocking back and forth, sucking his thumb like a little kid. Whatever the spirits had done to them, it was getting worse. "We have to go," I said, trying to lift Karen to her feet. "Right now." But she pulled away from me. "Can't leave. This is where we belong, where we've always belonged. The fever's taken us, and soon we'll be with the others." I grabbed my radio and tried calling for help, but the static was so bad I couldn't get through. Deep in the cave, I was cut off from everything. That's when I heard footsteps echoing from the tunnel behind me, multiple sets of footsteps, moving slow and deliberate. The spirits were coming. They emerged from the darkness like a funeral procession. The same faces I'd seen in the clearing, but more of them now. Men, women, children, all victims of the 1847 cholera outbreak. They filled the chamber until I was surrounded by dozens of translucent figures. "You came for them," the woman in the bonnet said. "But they're ours now. They remember what it was like to live here, to die here. They're part of us." "They don't belong here," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my fear. "They have their own lives, their own time." "Time?" The old man laughed bitterly. "We've been trapped here for over a century. What's time to us? These 3 young people, they understand our pain now. They know what it means to be forgotten." The little girl stepped forward. "You promised to help us, mister. You said you'd make people remember our names." She was right. I had promised. And looking around at these desperate spirits, I realized that was the key. They weren't evil. They were just lost and forgotten. They'd been holding on to this hollow because it was the only place they existed in any form. "I will help you," I said, "but not like this. You can't keep people here against their will. That's not remembrance. That's revenge." The spirits murmured among themselves. Some looked angry, but others nodded sadly. "What would you have us do?" the woman asked. "We've waited so long for someone to care, to acknowledge what happened to us." I thought about my grandmother's stories, about Cherokee burial traditions and the importance of honoring the dead. "Let these students go, and I'll make sure you're properly remembered. I'll research your names, organize me, memorial services, get you a real marker for your grave." "You promise?" the little girl asked. "You won't forget us like everyone else did?" "I promise. But you have to trust me and let them go." The spirits looked at each other again, having another silent conversation. Finally, the old man stepped forward. "It will take all of us working together," he said. "We've held on to them for days now. Breaking that connection, it might break us too." "What do you mean?" The woman in the bonnet looked sad. "We've used so much energy keeping their spirits here, binding them to our memories. Letting go might mean we fade completely. No more voices, no more presence. True death." I understood then. These spirits had been running on desperation and loneliness for over a century. They'd poured everything they had left into capturing the students, Releasing them might mean permanent oblivion. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "To rest?" The little girl started crying. "I want to see my mama again, but I'm scared. What if there's nothing after?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. These weren't monsters. They were scared, lost souls who'd been suffering alone for generations. "I can't promise what comes after," I said. "But I can promise you'll be remembered in this world. Your names, your lives, your deaths, they'll mean something." The spirits gathered closer together, and I felt the temperature in the cave drop even further. They were using the last of their strength for something big. "We'll try," the old man said. "But if we fade before finishing, you must still keep your promise." "I will." They joined hands around the three students, and suddenly the cave filled with light. Not bright light, more like moonlight through fog. The spirits became more solid, more real, and I could see their faces clearly for the first time. They weren't just cholera victims, they were people. A young mother holding a baby. A farmer with calloused hands. Children who'd never had a chance to grow up. Grandparents and teens and middle-aged shopkeepers. A whole community that had been wiped out and forgotten. The students started convulsing as the spiritual connection broke. Karen screamed, her own voice this time, not someone else's. Mike and Tom thrashed against the cave floor, their minds fighting to return to their own bodies. One by one, the spirits began to fade. The little girl was first, smiling as she became transparent. "Tell Mama I wasn't scared at the end," she whispered, then disappeared. The others followed. The young mother kissed her baby's forehead before they both dissolved. The old man tipped his hat to me, then was gone. The woman in the bonnet was last. "Thank you," she said as she started to fade. "For caring, for listening, for promising to remember." "What's your name?" I called out as she became barely visible. "Mary Elizabeth Thornton," she said. "I was 26 years old. I had dreams once." Then she was gone, and I was alone with 3 unconscious college students in a limestone cave deep under Screaming Hollow. But for the first time since arriving, the place felt peaceful. I carried the students out one at a time. They were weak but breathing, their minds slowly returning to their own bodies. By the time backup arrived with paramedics and the county coroner, all 3 were awake and talking, confused but coherent. "What happened?" Karen asked as the EMTs checked her vital signs. "I remember setting up camp, then nothing, like I was dreaming someone else's life." "You were sick," I told her. "Some kind of exposure in the cave system. You'll be fine now." It was easier than explaining the truth. The coroner confirmed what I'd found. The remains of at least 47 people, buried without markers over a century ago. The county decided to treat it as a historical find, not a crime scene. I spent the next 2 weeks researching in the county archives, tracking down death records from the cholera outbreak of 1847. It wasn't easy. Record-keeping was poor back then, and many documents had been lost over the years. But I found them. 47 names of people who'd lived and died in what would later become Screaming Hollow. Mary Elizabeth Thornton, age 26, survived by her parents in Ohio. Samuel Morrison, age 8, son of John and Ellen Morrison. William Ashford, age 52, local merchant. Children, parents, grandparents, neighbors, all dead within 2 weeks of the first case. I organized a memorial service at the local cemetery. It took some convincing, but I got the county to provide proper headstones for each person. Individual stones with their names and dates, arranged in a peaceful section overlooking the mountains they'd called home. More people came to the service than I'd expected. Descendants of families from neighboring settlements, local historians, even some Cherokee elders who performed traditional blessing ceremonies. We honored each name, acknowledged each life, and finally gave them the respect they'd been denied in death. After the service, I drove back to Screaming Hollow one last time. The place felt different now, quiet, but not empty. Peaceful instead of desperate. I walked down to the mass grave site, and found it covered with wildflowers that hadn't been there before. I've been back several times since then. It's become one of my regular patrol areas, and I recommend it to hikers looking for a quiet place to think. The screaming sound stopped after the memorial service, though locals still call it Screaming Hollow. Some names stick. Karen, Mike, and Tom all recovered fully. They finished college, got jobs, started families. None of them remember much about their time in the Hollow, which is probably for the best. Karen sent me a Christmas card last year with a photo of her twin daughters. She's a geology professor now, specializing in cave systems. I never told anyone the complete truth about what happened. Who would believe it? But I filed a detailed report with the Park Service, recommending that the Hollow be monitored carefully. During October, when the spiritual activity seemed strongest. My superiors think I'm just being cautious about unstable cave systems and seasonal wildlife behavior. That's fine with me. I've become something of an unofficial specialist in cases involving historical sites and unexplained disappearances. The Park Service sends me to investigate when hikers report unusual phenomena or when people go missing in areas with dark histories. It turns out there are more places like Screaming Hollow than most people know. My Cherokee grandmother died 3 years after the Hollow incident. Near the end, when the cancer had her talking about seeing relatives who'd passed on, she told me something I'll never forget. Some spirits get trapped between worlds because they're forgotten, she said. Others get trapped because they forget themselves. But the worst ones are those who remember everything and can't let go of the pain. Those are the ones that need the most help. I think about her words every time I patrol areas where tragedy has left its mark. The mountains are full of such places. Old battlefields, abandoned settlements, forgotten graveyards. Most are peaceful now, but some still hold on to their pain. I carry sage with me on patrols now, along with my standard gear. And I always remember what my grandmother taught me about talking to spirits with respect, acknowledging their pain without letting it consume you. Last week, I got a call about missing campers in a remote valley about 50 miles from Screaming Hollow. The area used to be a logging camp where 37 men died in a fire in 1923. No memorial, no marker, just old Forest Service records listing names and dates. I'm heading out there tomorrow with a copy of those records and a pocketful of sage, because I've learned that sometimes the job of a park ranger isn't just protecting the living from the wilderness. It's helping the dead find peace so they don't drag the living down with them. The mountains keep their secrets well, but they also keep their promises. And I promised Mary Elizabeth Thornton and 46 other souls that they wouldn't be forgotten. Some promises are too important to break, even when keeping them means walking into places where the dead still wander, calling for someone to remember their names. My name is Catherine Steelwind, and I've been a forest ranger for 16 years. In that time, I've pulled 734 people off mountains, cliffs, and out of caves. I've seen hypothermia turn grown men into babbling children. I've watched experienced hikers walk off trails and never come back. But until August 1992, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. Blood Mountain in Georgia's Chattahoochee National Forest earned its name from an old Cherokee and Creek battle. The locals say it's cursed ground. After what happened that summer, I'm starting to believe them. The heat wave hit us hard that August. Temperatures climbed to 102 degrees, and the drought turned the forest floor into kindling. Most hikers stayed home, but the stubborn ones kept coming. That's when the Chen family went missing. Robert and Lisa Chen had brought their kids, Tommy and Amy, up from Atlanta for a 3-day backpacking trip. Tommy was 8, Amy was 12. They'd filed a backcountry permit for the remote section of the Appalachian Trail that crosses Blood Mountain's peak. When they didn't check out on schedule, dispatch called me. I've been doing mountain rescue since 1976. Started as a rock climbing instructor after college, then joined the Forest Service when I realized I liked saving people more than teaching them. My climbing partner Sarah and I used to joke that we were the mountain's cleanup crew. Then Sarah died in '81 when her rope failed during what should have been a routine rescue. Equipment failure, the report said. But I checked that rope myself the night before. Some things just don't add up in these mountains. I loaded my pack with 3 days of supplies and headed up the trail. The Chen family had planned to hike the standard route, up the Appalachian Trail to Blood Mountain's summit, then loop back on the Freeman Trail. Should have been ease. I hiking for an experienced family. The heat hit me like a wall when I stepped out of my truck. Even at 6 a.m., the air shimmered. The forest was dead quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. In 16 years of hiking these trails, I'd never heard the woods this silent. I found their first campsite 2 miles up the trail. The tent stakes were still in the ground, but the tent was gone. Their camp stove sat cold beside a circle of stones. A child's purple sock hung from a low branch like someone had been doing laundry and forgot it. But it was the footprints that made my skin crawl. The Chen family wore hiking boots. I could see the tread patterns clearly in the dust, but mixed in with them were bare human footprints. Big ones. The heel strikes were deep, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy. Or someone heavy. The bare prints led off the main trail toward the remote wilderness area where most hikers never go. I followed them for 50 yards before I had to stop and think. In my years of search and rescue, I'd run into plenty of strange people living rough in the forest. Homeless folks, mental patients, the occasional Vietnam vet who couldn't adjust to civilian life. We called them wild men, and mostly they kept to themselves. But wild men don't usually take entire families. I keyed my radio. Base, this is Steelwind. Found the Chen campsite. Looks like they headed off trail with someone else, requesting backup. Static answered me. Then a voice that might have been dispatch, but the words were garbled. Hear you? Interference? Proceed? Great. Even the radio was acting up. I checked my compass and GPS, marked my position, and followed the tracks deeper into the wilderness. The bare footprints were easier to follow than I expected. Whoever made them wasn't trying to hide their trail. If anything, they seemed to want to be followed. Hat should have been my first warning. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became. At first, I thought it was just the heat bringing out the scent of rotting leaves and stagnant water, but as I climbed higher, the smell changed. It reminded me of the time I'd found a dead bear that had been lying in the sun for a week, sweet and rotten and wrong. By noon, I was sweating through my uniform and second-guessing my decision to come alone. The Forest Service taught us to always work in pairs for backcountry operations, but with the budget cuts, I was the only ranger available. And somewhere up ahead, the Chen family might be running out of time. I stopped to drink water and eat an energy bar. The silence was getting to me. No insects buzzing, no wind in the trees. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. That's when I heard it. A sound like clicking, but rhythmic, like someone snapping their fingers in a pattern. It came from somewhere ahead, deeper in the woods. I packed up my gear and kept following the trail. The clicking sound faded as I climbed higher, but the smell got worse. By 2 p.m. I was breathing through my mouth to avoid gagging. Whatever was making that stench, it was close. The bare footprints led me to a game trail that wound through thick mountain laurel. The bushes grew so dense I had to push branches aside to keep moving. Thorns caught my uniform and scraped my arms. But the trail was clear. Someone had been using this route regularly. That's when I found Robert Chen. He was wedged into a crack between 2 large rocks about 30 feet off the main path. At first glance, he looked like he might be sleeping. His hiking boots were still on his feet, and his day pack lay nearby. But when I got closer, I saw what had been done to him. Something had been eating him. The bite marks on his arms and legs were clearly human. I could see the dental pattern, but the jaw that made them was strong enough to crack bone. His ribs showed through torn flesh, and one arm was missing from the elbow down. I've seen plenty of animal attacks in my years as a ranger, bears, wild boars, even the occasional mountain lion. But this was different. Animals eat to survive. This looked like someone had been snacking. My radio crackled. Base, Catherine, can you hear? This is Steelwind, I said, keying the mic. I found Robert Chen. He's dead. Looks like an attack. I need a coroner and backup immediately. More static. Then what might have been words, but I couldn't make them out. I photographed the scene and marked the GPS coordinates. Robert's wounds were already attracting flies, but there was something odd about the blood pattern. It was smeared, like someone had been licking it clean. A family of 4 had come up this mountain. I'd found 1 body. That left 3 people still missing. I searched the area around Robert's body and found more bare footprints. They led away from the rocks toward an even more remote section of the mountain, but mixed in with them were smaller prints, boot prints that matched what a 12-year-old girl might wear. Amy was still alive when they took her father. The trail climbed steadily through dense forest. My GPS showed I was heading toward the old Cherokee battleground, the spot where Blood Mountain got its name. Local stories said you could still hear the screams on quiet nights, but I'd always figured that was tourist nonsense. I wasn't feeling so skeptical anymore. The clicking sound came back around 4 p.m. This time it seemed to be coming from multiple directions, like several people were communicating with each other. I stopped and listened carefully. The pattern was too complex to be random. There was definitely meaning in it. I was being watched. My hand went to the bear spray on my belt. In my years as a ranger, I'd never had to use it on a person. But the bite marks on Robert Chen suggested I might not be dealing with people anymore. The trail split ahead, the bear. Footprints went both ways, but the smaller boot prints only followed the left fork. I went left. 30 minutes later, I heard the first scream. It was high-pitched and desperate. A child, in terrible pain or fear. The sound echoed off the rocks, making it hard to pinpoint the source, but it was definitely coming from somewhere ahead. I ran. The path wound through a series of rock formations that created natural corridors between house-sized boulders. The screaming got louder as I got closer. It was definitely a child, probably Amy Chen. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. I kept running, following the boot prints around a massive outcrop of granite. On the other side, I found a natural amphitheater formed by curved rock walls. And I found Tommy Chen. The 8-year-old was tied to a dead tree with strips of cloth that looked like they'd been torn from his father's shirt. His mouth was gagged, but his eyes were wide with terror. He was alive, but barely conscious from dehydration. I cut him loose and gave him water from my canteen. He drank desperately, then grabbed my arm with both hands. "They took Amy," he whispered. "The hungry people took Amy." "Where?" I asked. "Where did they take her?" He pointed toward a gap in the rocks that led deeper into the mountain. "The cave. They said she has to get ready." Before I could ask what he meant, the clicking started again. This time it was close, very close, and it was coming from all around us. We weren't alone anymore. I grabbed Tommy and pulled him behind a large boulder just as the first one appeared. It had been human once. I could tell by the basic shape and the way it moved on 2 legs. But everything else was wrong. Its skin was pale and covered with dirt and scars. Its hair hung in matted clumps, and when it opened its mouth to make that clicking sound, I saw teeth that had been filed to points. It was naked and thin, but moved with a predator's grace. When it turned its head to look in our direction, I saw its eyes were completely black. No white shot, owing at all. Tommy whimpered beside me. I put my hand over his mouth and held him close. More clicking answered from different directions. At least 3 more of them, maybe 4. They were surrounding us. The first one approached our hiding spot slowly, like it was savoring the hunt. When it got within 10 feet, I could smell it. The same rotting stench I'd been following all day, but stronger. Much stronger. It stopped directly in front of our boulder and tilted its head, listening. Then it smiled, showing those filed teeth. It knew exactly where we were. The thing that used to be human stepped around our hiding spot like it was playing a game. When it saw us crouched behind the boulder, it threw back its head and made a sound like laughter mixed with a wolf's howl. The others answered from the rocks around us. 4 distinct voices, all making that horrible laughing howl. I pulled out my bear spray with one hand and kept Tommy pressed against me with the other. "Stay behind me," I whispered. The first one crouched down like it was going to pounce. Its black eyes never left mine. Then it spoke. "Ranger Catherine," it said in a voice like gravel scraping on stone. "We know you." My blood went cold. How did it know my name? "Sarah Martinez sends her regards," it continued, and smiled wider. Sarah. My climbing partner who died 11 years ago. The one whose rope failed during a rescue. "You're lying," I said, but my voice shook. "She screamed your name when we took her," the thing said. "Called for you to save her. But you weren't fast enough then, and you won't be fast enough now." It lunged. I hit it full in the face with the bear spray. It shrieked and stumbled backward, clawing at its eyes. But instead of retreating, it got angrier. The spray that would have stopped a charging grizzly barely slowed it down. "Run!" I yelled to Tommy. We scrambled up the rocky slough, as the other three closed in from different angles. They moved fast, faster than any human should be able to move over rough terrain. But they were toying with us, herding us in a specific direction. They wanted us to run deeper into their territory. Tommy was breathing hard, but he kept up. 8 years old, and he was tougher than most adults I'd rescued. We reached a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face. Below us was a 100-foot drop. Above us was solid rock. We were trapped. The 4 of them appeared at the other end of the ledge. Now I could see them clearly in the afternoon light. 3 men and 1 woman, all naked and filthy. Their bodies showed old scars and fresh wounds. The woman was missing 2 fingers on her left hand. One of the men had a deep gash across his chest that looked infected. But they were all grinning with those filed teeth. "Where's Amy?" I demanded. "Getting ready," the leader said. It was the same one I'd sprayed. Its eyes were red and streaming, but it seemed to find that funny. Like her mother is getting ready. Lisa Chen is alive? For now. We keep the mothers fresh longer. More meat. Better taste. Tommy made a choking sound behind me. I pulled out my radio and tried one more time. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Ranger Steelwind. I need immediate backup at Blood Mountain. Multiple hostiles, 2 missing civilians, 1 child in immediate danger." Only static answered. The leader tilted its head like a curious dog. "No one can hear you up here, Catherine. The mountain doesn't let signals through. That's why we chose this place." It started walking toward us along the narrow ledge. "Your friend Sarah figured that out too, right before we started cutting pieces off her." I lost it. All the anger I'd been carrying since Sarah's death, all the guilt about not being there when she needed me, all the helpless rage at these things that had once been people, it all exploded at once. I charged. The leader wasn't expecting that. I slammed into it at full speed, and we both went down hard on the stone ledge. My climbing experience kicked in, and I managed to get on top, pinning its arms with my knees. "Where are they?" I screamed, pressing my forearm against its throat. "Where are Amy and Lisa?" It laughed, even as I choked it. "The deep cave, where we keep the special meat." I pressed harder. "How many of you are there? More than you can kill?" Behind me, Tommy screamed. I spun around to see one of the others had gotten past us somehow. It was reaching for Tommy with long, dirt-caked fingernails. I rolled off the leader and tackled the second one. We went down in a tangle of limbs. It was stronger than it looked, much stronger. But I had training and desperation on my side. I grabbed a loose rock and smashed it across the thing's skull. It went limp. Black blood pooled on the stone beneath its head. I'd killed it. The other 3 were on their feet now, but they looked uncertain. Maybe they weren't used to prey that fought back. "Tommy, get behind me," I said, standing up slowly. The boy was shaking, but he moved. "Good kid." The leader wiped black blood from its mouth where I'd hit it. "You killed Joseph," it said, sounding more puzzled than angry. "We haven't lost one in so long." "You'll lose more if you don't let those people go," I said. It considered this, head tilted to one side. Then it smiled again. "No, I think we'll keep them. And we'll keep you too. You taste like anger and guilt. Very sweet." The remaining 3 spread out across the ledge, cutting off any escape route. But they were being more careful now. They'd learned I was dangerous. "The deep cave is 2 miles north," the leader said conversationally. "Past the old battlefield. You'll never find them in time. The woman will be ready for eating tonight. The little girl, maybe tomorrow." "Ready for eating?" Tommy whispered. "They have to marinate," the leader explained with that horrible grin. "Fear makes the meat tender." That's when I understood. These things weren't just killing people, they were farming them. And somewhere in a cave 2 miles away, Amy and Lisa Chen were being prepared, like cattle for slaughter. I looked at the drop behind us, then at the 3 nightmares blocking our escape. No good options. But I'd learned something important. They could be hurt. They could be killed. And if I was going to die on this mountain, I was going to take as many of them with me as possible. "Tommy," I said quietly, "when I say jump, you grab my belt and don't let go. Understand?" He nodded. "Jump!" I spun toward the cliff edge and leaped into space, praying my climbing experience would keep us both alive. We fell for what felt like forever. I grabbed for any handhold during the drop, a tree root, a crack in the rock, anything to slow our descent. My fingers found a narrow ledge about 60 feet down, and I managed to catch it for a split second before my grip failed. But that split second saved our lives. It changed our trajectory just enough that when we hit the slope below, we were rolling instead of falling straight down. We tumbled through brush and over loose rocks, Tommy's hands locked on my belt like I'd told him. When we finally stopped, we were both bleeding from a dozen cuts, but we were alive. Above us, the 3 creatures were making those clicking sounds. But they weren't following us down. Apparently, even they had limits. "You okay?" I asked Tommy. He nodded, though his face was pale with shock. "They ate my dad," he whispered. "I know. I'm sorry." "Are we going to die too?" I looked around, getting my bearings. We were in a narrow valley between 2 ridgelines. According to my compass, the deep cave the leader had mentioned would be somewhere to the north. The sun was getting low, which meant we had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. "Not if I can help it," I told him. I checked my equipment. The radio was smashed from the fall, but I still had my first aid kit, water, and some climbing gear. More importantly, I had a better understanding of what we were dealing with. These things had been human once. The leader's knowledge of Sarah's death proved that. They'd been taking people from these mountains for years, maybe decades, turning them into something that wasn't quite human anymore. But they could be hurt. They could be killed. And they'd made one mistake. They'd told me exactly where Amy and Lisa were being held. We made our way north through the valley as quietly as possible. Tommy was tougher than I'd expected. He didn't complain about his cuts or ask to rest. He just followed me through the brush, stepping where I stepped, staying low when I crouched. The smell got stronger as we traveled. That sweet, rotten stench that meant death and worse. But now I knew what it was. It was the smell of their cave system, their hunting ground and their pantry. We found the entrance just as the sun touched the horizon. It was a crack in the hillside, partially hidden by fallen trees and brush. The smell poured out of it like a physical thing. But more than that, I could hear sounds from inside, moaning, crying, human voices in pain. Amy and Lisa were in there, and they were still alive. I pulled out my flashlight and checked the batteries. About half power, enough for maybe an hour of good light. I had some emergency candles in my pack, but fire in a cave system could be deadly if there wasn't enough ventilation. "I want you to wait here," I told Tommy. "No." His voice was small but determined. "They have my sister. This is going to be dangerous. They ate my dad," he said again. "They're going to eat my mom and Amy. I'm not hiding anymore." Looking into his 8-year-old face, I saw something I recognized from the mirror. The look of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Okay," I said, "but you stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Deal?" "Deal." We squeezed through. At the cave entrance. The smell inside was overwhelming. I had to breathe through my shirt to keep from gagging. My flashlight beam showed a natural tunnel that led deeper into the mountain. The walls were stained with what I hoped was just mud and water, but I knew it wasn't. We followed the tunnel for maybe 50 yards before it opened into a larger chamber. That's where we found the bone pile. Human bones, picked clean and stacked like cordwood, skulls grinning in the flashlight beam, rib cages crushed and cracked to get at the marrow inside. I counted at least 20 people's worth of remains, maybe more. Tommy threw up. I didn't blame him, but the bones told a story. These things had been hunting here for a long time. The bottom of the pile showed bones that were old and yellowed. The ones on top were still white and fresh. And I recognized one of them. A woman's skull with a distinctive chip in one of the front teeth. The same chip I'd seen every day for 3 years when Sarah Martinez smiled at me. My climbing partner hadn't died in an equipment failure. She'd been taken, just like the Chen family. "We have to find them," Tommy whispered. I nodded and led him deeper into the cave system. The tunnel branched several times, but the smell and the sounds guided us toward the main chamber. As we got closer, I could make out voices, human voices mixed with that horrible clicking language. We crept to the edge of a large cavern and looked inside. It was their den. Crude sleeping areas made from stolen camping gear lined the walls. A fire pit in the center provided flickering light, and around the fire, 6 creatures sat in a circle, clicking and gesturing at each other like they were having a conversation. But it was what hung from the ceiling that made my blood freeze. Lisa Chen was suspended by her wrists from a natural hook in the rock. She was alive, but unconscious, her body covered with small cuts that were slowly bleeding. Below her, a bowl caught the drops. They were bleeding her like livestock. Amy was in a cage made from branches and rar, on the far side of the chamber. She was curled in a ball, crying softly. But she was alive and appeared unharmed. Yet. 6 of them in the chamber, plus the 3 we'd encountered on the ledge. That made 9 total. Even if the 3 from the ledge couldn't follow us down the cliff, I was looking at 6-to-1 odds. But I had advantages they didn't know about. I knew the terrain from years of rescue work. I had climbing equipment they wouldn't understand. And most importantly, they thought we were dead from the fall. I was about to prove them wrong. I whispered my plan to Tommy, gave him my spare flashlight, and told him exactly what to do. Then I worked my way around the cavern to a position above Amy's cage. These things might have been stronger and faster than normal humans, but they'd forgotten how to look up. I waited until they were all focused on their clicking conversation, then dropped into the chamber on my climbing rope. I landed next to Amy's cage and cut the ropes with my knife. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I'm a park ranger," I whispered. "I'm here to get you out." That's when the clicking stopped. All 6 of them were staring at me. For a moment, nobody moved. Then they attacked. What followed was the longest 5 minutes of my life. The creatures moved fast, but the cave worked against them. They kept getting in each other's way in their eagerness to reach me. I used my climbing rope to swing Amy up to a ledge where Tommy was waiting, then turned to face them with just my knife and whatever rocks I could grab. The first one reached me while I was still off balance from the rope swing. Its claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my uniform shirt. But my knife found its throat, and it went down gurgling black blood. 2 more came at me from different sides. I rolled between them and came up throwing rocks. One caught the smallest creature in the temple, and it stumbled. The other leaped at me with those filed teeth aimed at my neck. I got my forearm up just in time. Its teeth sank into the fabric of my sleeve, instead of my throat. I drove my knee into its stomach and it let go, gasping. Above me, Tommy was helping Amy climb toward a crack in the ceiling that led to another tunnel. Good. They were getting away. But I was running out of energy, and there were still 3 more creatures circling me like wolves. That's when Lisa Chen woke up. She'd been hanging there the whole time, bleeding slowly into their collection bowl. But the noise of fighting roused her. She looked around the cavern with unfocused eyes, taking in the scene. Then she started screaming. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain, It was pure rage, a mother's fury at what these things had done to her family. She thrashed against her binding so violently that the rope holding her began to fray. The creatures were distracted by her screaming. That gave me the opening I needed. I grabbed a burning branch from their fire and swung it like a club. The flames drove them back toward the walls of the cavern. But I knew it wouldn't last long. There wasn't much wood left to burn. Above me, I could hear Tommy and Amy making their way through the upper tunnel. They were going to make it out. Lisa's rope finally snapped. She fell 10 feet to the cave floor and landed hard. But she was up again in seconds. Weeks of captivity and blood loss should have left her too weak to move. But she was running on something stronger than physical strength. She was running on a mother's love. One of the creatures tried to grab her. She picked up a sharp rock and drove it into its eye. It fell backward, shrieking. "The tunnel!" I yelled to her, pointing up to where the children had gone. She nodded and started climbing the rope I'd left hanging there. The remaining creatures turned their attention back to me. I was down to my last few seconds of burning branch. Once the fire went out, they'd overwhelm me, but I'd done what I came to do. The Chen family was going to survive. 2 out of 4 wasn't perfect, but it was better than none. The branch burned down to my fingers, and I had to drop it. The creatures smiled their horrible smiles and moved in for the kill. That's when the cavalry arrived. Tommy had made it all the way through the upper tunnel system and found another exit. But instead of running away, he'd gone back to where we'd left my pack and gotten my emergency flares. The first flare came bouncing down through the crack in the ceiling like a red star. It hit the cave floor and filled the chamber with brilliant crimson light. The creatures screamed and covered their eyes. They'd been living in darkness so long that the sudden brightness was agony for them. I didn't waste the opportunity. I grabbed Lisa's rope and climbed toward the tunnel as fast as I could. More flares rained down from above. Tommy had found my whole emergency supply. The creatures stumbled around the cavern, blinded and howling. I reached the upper tunnel just as the flares began to burn out. Tommy and Amy were waiting for me, along with Lisa, who was barely conscious but still moving. We helped each other through the narrow passage toward fresh air and daylight. Behind us, the howling grew louder. The creatures had recovered from the flares and were following us, but the tunnel was too narrow for them to move fast, and we had a head start. We emerged from a different cave entrance just as the sun was setting. The children were exhausted. Lisa was delirious from blood loss, and I was running on pure adrenaline. But we were alive. And some of those secrets are still hungry. My name is Samuel Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I'm telling this story to you Sheriff's Department folks because what happened up on Devil's Backbone Ridge ain't in any training manual. I've pulled 847 people out of these Kentucky mountains, including that mess on White Top Mountain when the avalanche hit in '79. Lost 12 good men that day, but we saved 34. Point is, I know these woods. I know what belongs here and what don't. I'm 45 years old now. Been a widower for 3 years since Martha died in that car wreck down on Highway 27. My boys, Jake and Tommy, they live with their grandparents now. Can't blame them. After Martha passed, I threw myself into this job. Figured if I couldn't save her, maybe I could save somebody else. Used to work the coal mines before this. Took a chunk of ceiling to the back during a cave-in and couldn't do the heavy lifting no more. That's when I became a ranger. Best decision I ever made, even with all the strange things I've seen up in these hollers. Growing up, my great-grandmother used to tell stories about shadow cats that walked on 2 legs. Said the Cherokee called them Nevi-Ivwi, beasts that walked between worlds. I always figured it was just mountain talk, you know? Stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the dark woods. That was before November of 1982. Devil's Backbone Ridge sits about 30 miles from the nearest town. It's a knife-edge ridgeline that cuts through Daniel Boone National Forest at 3,200 feet. Limestone cliffs drop off on both sides, and the hollers are so deep that radio signals can't get through. When you're up there, you're truly alone. The whole thing started when 3 brothers came into the ranger station on a Tuesday morning. Jake, Roy, and Pete Mullins, local boys who'd been hunting these mountains since they were knee-high to a grasshopper. Jake was the oldest at 32, built like a brick house from working construction. Roy was the middle brother, thin as a rail but tough as leather. Pete was the baby at 25, always had a smile and a joke ready. "Something ain't right up on the backbone," Jake told me, his hands shaking as he rolled a cigarette. "We've been hunting that ridge for 15 years, but this time, something was hunting us." Roy nodded, his face pale. "Found our camp torn up yesterday morning. Claw marks 8 feet up the oak trees. Ain't no bear in Kentucky that big." "And the sounds," Pete whispered. "Lord help me, the sounds it made. Like a panther, but deeper. Made my bones ache just hearing it." I'd handled plenty of bear scares over the years. Sometimes a big boar would get territorial and give hunters a fright. But the Mullins boys weren't the type to spook easy. If they said something was wrong, something was wrong. "You boys stay in town tonight," I told them. "I'll head up there in the morning and check it out." Jake grabbed my arm. "Don't go alone, Sam. Please. Whatever's up there, it ain't natural." But I'd been going into these mountains alone for years. Had my 30-06 for bears, my emergency gear, and a new GPS unit the Forest Service had issued. Figured I could handle whatever was scaring the Mullins boys. That night, the temperature dropped to 25 degrees. Ice storm was coming in from the west, coating everything in a slick, dangerous shell. Perfect weather for accidents. Perfect weather for people to get lost and die. Perfect weather for things to hunt. I started up the trail to Devil's Backbone at first light, my breath making white clouds in the bitter air. The GPS was acting strange from the start, showing my elevation jumping between 3,000 and 8,000 feet, even though I was walking steady uphill. Figured it was the cold messing with the electro. Nix. The woods were too quiet. That should have been my first real warning. In 19 years of walking these trails, I'd never heard silence like that. No birds calling, no squirrels, chattering, no wind rustling through the bare branches, just the crunch of my boots on frozen leaves and the sound of my own breathing. Found the Mullins brothers' camp about 2 miles up the ridge. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Their tent was shredded, but not by claws. It looked like something had grabbed it and twisted it into knots the way you'd wring out a dish rag. The campfire ring was scattered, rocks thrown 20 feet in every direction. But it was the trees that really got my attention. Claw marks, just like Roy had said, 8 feet up the trunk of an oak tree that had to be 100 years old. 4 parallel gouges, each one 3 inches deep and a foot long. No bear in Kentucky could reach that high, and no bear had claws that could cut that deep into hardwood. I pulled out my camera and took pictures, then measured the marks with my ranger tape. 7 inches from the bottom of the lowest gouge to the top of the highest. The spacing was too wide for any animal I knew. That's when my radio started acting up. Static filled with sounds that made my skin crawl, low growling mixed with what sounded like voices. I tried to call back to the station but got nothing except that awful noise. The GPS was going crazy now, spinning between readings like a broken compass. I followed the trail of destruction deeper into the woods. Found Jake's hunting rifle about a quarter mile from camp, and what I saw made me stop in my tracks. The barrel was twisted into a spiral, like someone had grabbed both ends and wrung it out like a wet towel. The metal stock was bent completely in half. No animal could do that. Hell, no machine could do that without heat and serious pressure. The temperature started dropping, but not normal cold. This was different, a pocket of air so frigid it made my teeth ache. I checked my thermometer and couldn't believe what I saw, 40 degrees. Reese colder than the surrounding air, like winter had decided to make camp in that one spot. The smell hit me next. Musk and sulfur and something else. Something that reminded me of the meat locker behind Murphy's butcher shop when the power went out for a week. Sweet and rotten and wrong. I was checking my watch when the world seemed to skip. 1 second it was showing 10:30 a.m., the next it was past 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. But I swear I'd only been walking for a couple hours. That's when I found Roy. He was 60 feet up in an ancient oak tree, sitting in the crook of 2 massive branches like he'd climbed up there to take a nap. But Roy was dead, and he looked like he'd been drained dry. His skin was paper white and drawn tight over his bones. No blood on him, no wounds I could see. just empty. I called up to him, hoping maybe I was wrong, that maybe he was just unconscious. But when the wind shifted his head, I saw his eyes. They were white as milk, staring at nothing. "Roy!" I shouted. "Roy, can you hear me?" His mouth fell open, and his voice came out, thin and hollow. "Help me, Sam. It's still down there. It's waiting." But Roy's lips didn't move. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. Dead men don't talk. Dead men don't call for help. But I'd heard Roy's voice, clear as day. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 yellow lights in the growing darkness between the trees. Not reflecting light like an animal's eyes do, making their own light, bright as headlights. They were watching me from about 50 yards away, unblinking. I raised my rifle, but the eyes disappeared. No sound of something running away, no crashing through the brush. Just gone, like they'd never been there at all. I started backing toward the trail, keeping my rifle ready. The silence pressed in around me like a living thing. Even my footstep seemed too loud. That's when I heard Martha's voice. "Sam? Sam, where are you?" "I'm scared, honey. Please help me." My dead wife calling to me from the darkness ahead. I knew Martha was dead. I'd buried her myself 3 years ago, stood by her grave until the last shovelful of dirt was thrown. But that was her voice, sweet and scared, just like when she used to have nightmares. "Sam, please. It's so cold here. I can't find my way home." The voice was coming from deeper in the woods, away from the trail. Every instinct I had screamed not to follow it. But hearing Martha's voice, even knowing it wasn't real, made my chest ache something fierce. I started walking toward the sound, rifle ready. The yellow eyes appeared again, closer this time. They moved wrong, too smooth, like they were floating instead of attached to something walking. "That ain't Martha," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. "Martha's gone. She's been gone for 3 years." The voice changed. Now it was Jake Mullins calling out. "Sam, over here! I found Pete. He's hurt bad." But I'd left Jake back in town that morning. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Devil's Backbone. I stopped walking. The pieces were starting to come together, and I didn't like the picture they made. Something was using voices to lure people into the woods, something that had killed Roy and twisted Jake's rifle into scrap metal. The forest opened up into a small clearing ahead. I could see the outline of an old fire tower, abandoned since the 1960s. Figured if I could get up high, maybe I could see what I was dealing with. The tower was made of steel, 40 feet tall with a small cabin at the top. I started climbing, my boots ringing on the metal steps. About halfway up, I noticed scratches in the steel supports. Fresh scratches, like someone had dragged claws across the metal beams. I made it to the cabin and looked out over the forest. The sun was almost gone now, just a red glow behind the ridge. I could see for miles in every direction, nothing but empty woods and limestone cliffs. That's when something hit the tower. The whole structure shook like a giant had grabbed it and given it a shake. I grabbed the railing as the cabin swayed back and forth. Through the floorboards, I could hear something climbing up the outside of the tower, metal groaning under enormous weight. I looked down through the trap door and saw it. The thing was bigger than any cat I'd ever seen, had to be 8 feet long and built like a locomotive. Black as shadow, with muscles rippling under fur that seemed to absorb light. Its paws were the size of dinner plates, and I could see claws as long as railroad spikes. But it was the eyes that made my knees go weak. Those yellow lights, intelligent and hungry. Looking right at me like I was dinner, and it was deciding which piece to eat first. It spoke in Martha's voice. "Why didn't you save me, Sam? Why did you let me die?" Then Jake's voice. "It's your fault we came up here. Your fault Roy's dead." Then Roy's voice, hollow and strange. "It's cold up in the tree, Sam. So cold and lonely." The thing was climbing toward me, claws screeching against steel. Each step made the tower sway more. I pulled out my rifle, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. I fired 3 shots into its chest. The bullets hit. I saw them spark off its hide, but they might as well have been spitballs. The creature barely flinched. It reached the cabin and stuck its massive head through the trap door. Up close, I could see its face wasn't quite right. Too long, with a mouth full of teeth like broken glass. Its breath smelled like roadkill in summer. "Hello, Samuel," it said in Martha's voice. "I've been waiting for you." I backed against the far wall of the cabin, but there was nowhere to go. The drop was 40 feet to the ground. Even if I survived the fall, the thing would be on me before I could run. That's when I remembered the emergency flat. In my pack. I pulled it out and struck the igniter. Red light filled the cabin, bright as the sun. The creature let out a shriek like a steam whistle and jerked its head back. It didn't, like the light. I lit 2 more flares and threw them down through the trapdoor. The thing scrambled down the tower faster than it had climbed up, making sounds I hope I never hear again. I waited in that cabin until dawn, surrounded by the dying light of my flares. When the sun came up, I climbed down and found massive paw prints leading away from the tower. They headed toward the limestone cliffs at the end of the ridge. I should have gone back to town right then. Should have called for backup, or the National Guard, or anybody with bigger guns. But I kept thinking about Pete Mullins. If he was still alive out there, he was my responsibility. The tracks led to a waterfall that dropped down the side of Devil's Backbone. Behind the falling water, I found the mouth of a cave. The smell that came out of that hole was worse than anything I'd ever encountered. Dead things, and sulfur, and something else. Something that made my stomach turn over. But I could hear Pete's voice calling from inside. "Help me. Please. Somebody help me." I turned on my flashlight and followed the voice into the darkness. The cave went back further than my light could reach. The walls were covered in scratches, like the thing had been sharpening its claws for years. And scattered across the floor were bones. Lots of bones. Some were old, yellow with age. Others looked fresh. I saw a belt buckle I recognized. Belonged to a hiker who'd gone missing 2 summers ago. We'd searched for weeks, but never found a trace. The cave opened into a larger chamber, and that's where I found Pete. He was alive, but just barely. Sitting against the far wall with his knees drawn up to his chest, rocking back and forth. His hair had gone white as snow, and his face was lined like an old man's. He looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. "Pete," I whispered, trying not to disturb whatever was lurking in the deep, or darkness. "Pete, it's Sam. We need to get out of here." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "It talks to them, Sam. Uses their voices after it kills them. Roy's been calling to me all night, telling me what it's going to do." "Where is it now?" Pete pointed deeper into the cave. "Sleeping. It hunts at night and sleeps during the day, but it knows we're here. It's been playing with me, letting me think I might escape." That's when I heard Martha's voice again, coming from the darkness behind us. "Don't leave me here, Sam. Take me home." The creature had circled around while we were talking. We were trapped. The yellow eyes appeared in the darkness behind us, cutting off our escape route. The creature moved into the dim light from my flashlight, and I got my first clear look at the thing that had been terrorizing Devil's Backbone. It was even bigger than I'd thought, 6 feet tall at the shoulder and built like a freight train. Its black fur seemed to swallow light, and those dinner plate paws ended in claws that could rip through steel. But it was the intelligence in those yellow eyes that scared me most. This wasn't just some animal. This thing could think, could plan. "Hello, Samuel," it said in Martha's voice, perfect down to the way she used to say my name when she was worried. "I missed you so much." "That ain't my wife," I told Pete, though hearing Martha's voice made my heart ache. "My wife is dead and buried." The creature tilted its massive head, almost like it was amused. When it spoke again, it used Jake's voice. "Your fault we came up here, Sam. Your fault Roy's hanging in that tree like a Christmas ornament." Then Roy's voice, hollow and wrong. "It gets stronger every time it feeds. Started with just animals, but people taste so much better. All that fear makes the meat tender." Pete whimpered beside me. "It's been talking like that all night, using their voices to tell me what it's going to do to us." I raised my rifle, but I knew bullets wouldn't stop this thing. I'd already tried that. but maybe I could buy us some time. What? Are you? I asked, backing toward the far wall of the cave. The creature padded closer, its claws clicking on the limestone floor. I'm old, it said in a voice that might have been its own, deep and rumbling like distant thunder. Older than your Cherokee legends, older than your mountains. I am hunger given form, fear made flesh. The Cherokee called you Nvi-Ivwi. They called me many names, Shadow Walker, Night Hunter, Fear Eater. Names don't matter. Only hunger matters. It was close enough now that I could smell its breath, like an open grave. I sleep for years at a time, deep in the earth. But every so often the hunger wakes me, and I come hunting. Why here? Why Devil's Backbone? The creature's mouth opened in what might have been a grin, showing teeth like broken glass. The Cherokee knew this place was special, a thin spot between worlds. The fear here tastes sweeter, lasts longer. Your terror will feed me for another decade. I felt along the cave wall behind me, hoping for another way out. My fingers found a crack in the limestone, narrow but maybe wide enough to squeeze through. You killed Roy, I said, trying to keep the creature talking while I worked at the crack. Roy was delicious, it said in Martha's voice. All that confusion and terror when he realized he was 60 feet up a tree with no memory of how he got there. The fear in his heart when he saw me climbing toward him. And Jake? Jake ran, made it almost a mile before I caught him, used his own brother's voice to call him back. The creature's eyes gleamed. Would you like to hear him scream? The sound that came out of its throat was pure agony, a man's voice crying out in pain and terror. Had to be Jake, had to be what he sounded like when this thing killed him. Pete covered his ears and started sobbing. Make it stop, Sam, please make it stop. The crack in the wall was getting wider. I could feel cold air coming through, another chamber, maybe even another way out. You're going to let us go, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure every hunter and hiker in Kentucky knows about this cave. They'll come with dynamite and bulldozers and bury you so deep you'll never wake up again. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking bones. You think your kind scares me? I've been feeding on humans for 1,000 years. Loggers, miners, hunters, lost children. You're all just meat to me. It crouched down, getting ready to spring. But you're special, Samuel. Your fear tastes different, deeper. All that guilt about your dead wife, all that pain you carry, you'll keep me fed for years. I grabbed Pete's arm and shoved him toward the crack in the wall. Go, now! The creature leaped, but I was already moving. I squeezed through the crack, just as those massive claws raked the air where my head had been. We tumbled into a narrow passage that led upward. I could hear the creature behind us, too big to follow, but trying anyway. The sound of claws on stone filled the tunnel as we climbed toward a dim light ahead. We came out on a ledge halfway down the cliff face, maybe 400 feet above the valley floor. The morning sun was just peeking over the ridge, and I could see the forest spread out below us. But our troubles weren't over. The ledge was maybe 6 feet wide with sheer rock above and below, and I could hear the creature moving through the cave system, looking for another way to reach us. There, Pete pointed with a shaking hand. Fire tower. We can signal for help. The tower was across a gap in the cliff face, maybe 20 feet away. Too far to jump, but I had climbing rope in my pack. I tied one end around a sturdy rock outcrop and threw the other end across the gap. It caught on one of the tower's support beams. You go first, I told Pete. He looked at the rope, then at the drop below. I can't, Sam. I'm scared of heights. Behind us, the creature's roar echoed from the cave. Mouth. It had found another way out. Pete, listen to me. That thing is coming, and when it gets here, we're both dead. You can make this crossing. I know you can. The creature appeared at the cave entrance, too big to fit through, but reaching for us with those massive claws. Its yellow eyes burned with hunger and rage. I'll be right behind you, I promised Pete. He grabbed the rope and started across, hand over hand. I watched him make it halfway before the creature gave up trying to squeeze through the cave mouth and disappeared back into the darkness. It was looking for another way out, and knowing these caves like I did, I figured it would find one. Pete made it to the tower and started climbing toward the cabin. I grabbed the rope and started across, trying not to look down at the valley floor spinning below me. I was 3/4 of the way across when I heard it. The sound of claws on stone coming from above. The creature had found a way up to the top of the cliff. It appeared at the edge of the precipice, silhouetted against the morning sky. For a moment, we stared at each other across that gap. Then it gathered itself and leaped. The thing was airborne for what felt like forever, massive and black against the blue sky. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it was going to make it all the way across, but gravity won. The creature slammed into the cliff face about 10 feet below the tower, claws screeching as it tried to find purchase on the smooth rock. It looked up at me with those burning yellow eyes and spoke in Martha's voice one last time. "This isn't over, Samuel. I know where you live. I know where your boys sleep." Then it fell, tumbling down the cliff face and disappearing into the trees below. I made it to the fire tower and found Pete huddled in the cabin, still shaking from our ordeal. We stayed there until a Forest Service helicopter spotted us around noon. The pilot said they'd been searching since Jake Mullen's truck was found abandoned on the access road. They airlifted us to the hospital in Corbin. Pete was in bad shape, severe shock, hypothermia, and what the doctors called acute stress reaction. His hair stayed white, and he never was quite the same after that. Quit his job at the lumber mill and moved in with his sister down in Tennessee. The official report listed Jake and Roy Mullins as victims of a flash flood during severe weather. The Forest Service said the ice storm had caused a dam of debris upstream, and when it broke loose, it swept the brothers away. Their bodies were never found. The local newspaper ran a small story about a hunting accident during severe weather conditions. Nobody mentioned giant claw marks or twisted rifle barrels or voices in the darkness. I tried to tell my supervisor what really happened, but he just looked at me like I'd been in the sun too long. "You've been through a trauma, Sam," he said. "Take some time off. Get your head right." So I took his advice. Transferred to a desk job in the main office, handling permits and paperwork. Told everyone I was getting too old for the backcountry work, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't handle the darkness anymore. I developed what the doctors call nyctophobia, fear of the dark. Soon as the sun started going down, I'd get the shakes. My heart would race, and I'd hear things that weren't there. Martha's voice, calling for help. The Mullins brothers, asking why I didn't save them. But the worst part was the guilt. I kept thinking about what the creature had said, that it knew where I lived, knew where my boys slept. Every night, I'd check the locks 3 times, make sure all the lights were on, keep my rifle loaded by the bed. 3 months later, Pete Mullins was found dead in his sister's backyard in Tennessee. The local sheriff said it looked like a heart attack, but Pete was only 25 years old and healthy as a horse. His sister said she found him sitting under their big oak tree, looking up at the sky with white eyes and that same aged face. No wounds on him, no signs of violence. Just empty, like something had drained the life right out of him. I drove down to Tennessee for the funeral. Pete's sister pulled me aside after the service and pressed something into my hand, a silver pendant on a chain. "Granny Fletcher came by the house," she whispered. "Said to give you this. Said you'd know what it was for." I recognized the pendant, Cherokee symbols carved into old silver, the kind of charm mountain folk used for protection against things that shouldn't exist. That night, I drove back up to Devil's Backbone, alone. I placed silver charms at every trailhead, every access point to the ridge, hung them from trees, buried them at crossroads, scattered them like seeds around the area where the creature had its lair. I put up new warning signs too, though I had to be careful about the wording. Danger, unstable rock conditions, and area closed due to geological hazards. Anything to keep people away from Devil's Backbone during the new moon. Because I checked, and every attack had happened during the new moon, when the nights were darkest and the creature was strongest. It's been 3 years now since that November morning when the Mullins brothers walked into my office. I'm retired from the Forest Service, living in town, keeping my lights on and my doors locked. My boys think their old man went a little soft in the head after their mother died. Maybe they're right. But every month when the moon goes dark, I drive up to Devil's Backbone. I check my warning signs, replace any charms that have gone missing, and listen to the silence in those woods. Most months, it's just quiet, normal quiet, with owls hooting and branches creaking in the wind. But some months, usually in November, when the air gets thin and cold, the silence is different. Heavy and ting, like something holding its breath. On those nights, I sit in my truck at the trailhead with my rifle across my knees and my high beams cutting through the darkness, waiting for yellow eyes to appear in the tree line. So far, they haven't. But I keep watching anyway, because somebody has to. Because I know that thing down in the cave wasn't killed by a fall. Something that old, that strong, doesn't die easy. It's sleeping again, deep in the earth, waiting for its hunger to wake it up. And when it does wake up, when it starts hunting again, I'll be there. Because that's what rangers do. We protect people from the dangers they don't even know exist, even if nobody believes us, even if we're scared of the dark. Even if we wake up every morning wondering if today's the day those yellow eyes come for us. My name is Margaret Coldwater, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. I know these Virginia mountains like the back of my hand. I've seen black bears up close 847 times without getting so much as a scratch. I have a PhD in wildlife biology, and I used to think I knew everything that lived in Jefferson National Forest. I was wrong. It was March 1988, and the late winter thaw was making everything muddy and cold. The fog hung thick in the valleys around Hollowback Mountain like gray cotton. At 37, I'd spent my whole adult life studying animals. I worked alone most of the time, which suited me fine. People were harder to understand than bears. My research partner, Elena, died 3 years ago in what everyone called a bear attack. But bears don't usually drag bodies half a mile uphill and hang them in trees. I never talked about the details. Who would believe me? The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Moses Fletcher, a local hunting guide, sounded shaken over the radio. Moses had been guiding hunters in these mountains for 20 years. Nothing spooked him. Ranger Coldwater, I need you up on Hollowback. Something's been following my clients. Something big. Bear? I asked, already packing my tranquilizer rifle. Ma'am, I've seen plenty of bears. This ain't no bear. This walks like a man, but it ain't human. I'd heard stories like this before. The Fook monster reports from Arkansas were always turning out to be black bears walking on their hind legs. When bears stand up, they look enormous. Add some fear and bad lighting, and suddenly you've got a monster. But Moses wasn't some city hunter looking for excitement. He knew wildlife. I loaded my truck with the usual gear: tranquilizer gun, first aid kit, radio, camera. The drive up Hollowback Mountain took 40 minutes on winding dirt roads. No cell service up there. No nothing, really. Just trees and rocks and cold mountain streams. The trailhead parking was empty, except for Moses's old Ford. I found him sitting on the tailgate, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. You look like you've seen a ghost, I said. Might have. Moses was a thin man with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. Today, he looked older. Been guiding up here since 1968. Never seen anything like this. Tell me what happened. Moses stubbed out his cigarette. Had 2 hunters from Richmond up here yesterday. Good guys, experienced. We were tracking a nice 8-point buck when they both just froze. Started looking around like they heard something. I listened too, but didn't hear nothing. Animals can sense things we can't, I said. That's what I figured. Then Jimmy, that's one of the hunters. He points through the trees and whispers, "What is that?" I look where he's pointing, and there's this shape moving between the trees, maybe 60 yards out. Moses stood up and walked to the edge of the parking area. At first I thought it was another hunter, but it was too tall, way too tall, and the way it moved, it didn't walk like a person. It flowed, like it was floating just above the ground. Could have been shadows playing tricks, I suggested. Moses shook his head. That's what I told myself, but then it stopped and looked right at us. Even from that distance, I could feel it watching. The hair on my arm stood up. Both hunters wanted to leave right then and there. I'd heard similar stories before. Usually they turned out to be nothing. But something in Moses's voice made me take it seriously. Show me where you saw it. We hiked up the main trail for about half a mile. The fog was getting thicker, muffling sounds and making everything look ghostly. Moses stopped at a small clearing. This is where we were when I saw it, he said, pointing across the clearing toward a thick stand of oak tea, Reese. It was standing right over there. I walked over to examine the area. The ground was soft from the recent thaw, perfect for tracks. I found plenty of deer prints, some squirrel, tracks, even the paw prints of a small fox. But no bear sign, no claw marks on trees, no scat, no hair caught on branches. That was odd. This looked like perfect bear habitat. Then I saw something that made me stop cold. There in the soft mud was a footprint like nothing I'd ever seen. It was huge, 19 inches long and 7 inches wide. But it wasn't a bear paw. It had 5 toes, like a human foot, but much bigger. The toes were thick and stubby, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. Moses, come look at this. He walked over and stared down at the print. His face went pale. That's what I was afraid you'd find, he said quietly. I knelt down to examine it closer. The print was deep, pressed into the mud by something very heavy. But the strangest part was the heel. It had ridges, like the bottom of a human foot, but huge. How much would something have to weigh to make a print this deep? I asked. Moses shrugged. My guess? 500-600 pounds. Maybe more. I followed the tracks deeper into the woods. There were more prints, spaced about 8 feet apart. Whatever made them was taking huge steps. I measured carefully with my tape measure. 8-foot strides meant the creature had to be at least 12 feet tall. The tracks led downhill toward a small creek. As we followed them, I started noticing other things. Broken branches, 10 feet off the ground. Saplings twisted and bent like someone had grabbed them and wrung them like dishcloths. The bark was stripped off some trees at a height I couldn't reach even standing on my toes. Something's been marking territory, I said. The smell hit me when we got close to the creek. It was like wet dog mixed with rotting leaves and something else I couldn't identify. Something wild and musky that made my nose wrinkle. You smell that? I asked Moses. He nodded. Been smelling it for the last 10 minutes. Gets stronger as we get closer to the water. We followed the creek downstream for maybe 200 yards. The tracks stayed close to the water. Then they just stopped. Where'd they go? Moses asked. I looked around. The creature hadn't gone into the water. The creek was too shallow to hide footprints in the muddy bottom. It hadn't climbed any trees. The lowest branches were 15 feet up. The tracks just ended, like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. That should have been our first clue to leave. I decided to set up camp nearby and watch the area. Moses wanted to stay, but I convinced him to go home. This was my job, not his. As the sun went down, the forest got quiet. Too quiet. I'd camped in these woods hundreds of times, and there were always sounds. Owls hooting, small animals rustling in the leaves, branches creaking in the wind. Tonight, there was nothing. I set up my sleeping bag near the creek and built a small fire. The flames threw dancing shadows between the trees. Every shadow looked like it might be moving. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the first sound. It was low and deep like a foghorn in the distance. But foghorns don't echo through mountain forests. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds, then faded away. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening hard. Nothing. 15 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was closer, and I could tell it was some kind of call. Not a bear, not a wolf, not any animal I knew. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. Nothing but darkness beyond the small circle of light. The third call came from right across the creek. I spun around, pointing my flashlight toward the sound. For just a second, the light caught something moving between the trees, something big and dark that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. My heart started pounding. I reached for my tranquilizer gun with one hand was. Heil keeping the flashlight pointed at the spot where I'd seen the movement. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I sat there for 3 hours, too scared to sleep, sweeping my flashlight back and forth. Nothing moved. No more sounds. But I could feel something watching me from the darkness beyond my small circle of firelight. When morning came, I found new tracks all around my campsite. The tracks circled my camp like something had spent hours walking around me while I slept. They were the same huge footprints I'd found earlier, but now there were dozens of them. Whatever made them had come within 10 feet of my sleeping bag. I followed the trail back into the woods. The tracks led to a small clearing about a quarter mile from the creek. In the center of the clearing was something that made my blood run cold. My camping gear, the spare water bottles, my backup radio, and my emergency flare gun that I'd left in my truck, were arranged in a perfect circle on the ground. In the center of the circle was a pile of rocks stacked into a small pyramid. I hadn't heard anyone near my truck. I'd been awake most of the night listening. But somehow, something had gotten into my vehicle and moved my things without making a sound. I ran back to check the truck. The windows were fine. The doors were still locked. But my gear was definitely missing. Whatever had taken it was smart enough to get into a locked vehicle without breaking anything. That's when I started to get really scared. I radioed the ranger station. "Base, this is Coldwater. I need backup on Hollowback Mountain. Got some kind of situation up here." Static crackled back at me. "Say again, Margaret. You're breaking up." I tried again. More static. The radio had worked fine yesterday. I checked the battery. Full power. I checked the antenna. No damage. But all I could get was static filled with a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I decided to hike out and get help, but first, I wanted to examine the arranged gear more carefully. Maybe there were clues about what kind of animal could do something like this. As I approached the clearing again, I noticed the smell was back. That wild, musky odor that made my skin crawl. It was much stronger now. The gear was exactly where I'd left it, arranged in that perfect circle. But something new had been added. In the center of the rock pile was a human skull. Old. Very old. The bone was brown with age and had moss growing on it, but it hadn't been there an hour ago. I backed away from the clearing slowly. Whatever was doing this was still nearby, still watching. That's when I saw the trees. The oaks and maples around the clearing had been changed overnight. Branches were woven together 15 feet off the ground, creating what looked like a crude shelter or nest. Smaller branches and leaves were tucked into the weaving in a pattern that almost looked decorative. Something was living up there. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The photos would be blurry and dark, but at least I'd have some evidence of what I was seeing. Through the camera lens, I saw movement in the woven branches. I lowered the camera and looked up. A face was staring down at me from the shelter. It was huge, covered in dark reddish hair. The eyes were dark brown, almost black, but they looked intelligent, human intelligence. The face was flat, with a heavy brow and a wide nose. When it saw me looking, it didn't run away. It just watched me, calmly. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Then it made a sound. Not the low call I'd heard the night before, but something softer. Almost like it was trying to talk. I raised the camera again, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I managed to take one photo before the creature moved. It didn't climb down from the tree. It didn't jump. It just seemed to flow down the trunk like water, moving impossibly fast and quiet for something so big. By the time I blinked, it was gone. But the smell lingered, and I could hear something, large, moving through the forest, staying just out of sight but keeping pace with me as I backed toward the trail. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran all the way back to my truck, expecting to feel huge hands grab me from behind at any second. The truck started on the first try, and I drove down the mountain as fast as I dared on the winding dirt road. I didn't stop shaking until I was back at the ranger station, but I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. They weren't the eyes of a wild animal. They were the eyes of something that could think, something that understood exactly what it was looking at when it saw me. That night I called my old professor, Dr. Harrison, at the university. He'd studied primate behavior for 40 years. "Margaret, what you're describing sounds like classic Bigfoot encounters," he said. "I've heard similar stories from the Pacific Northwest." "But this is Virginia," I said. "We don't have anything like that here." "Maybe you do now. Climate change is pushing a lot of species into new territories. Or maybe they've been there all along, and you're just the first person to get close enough to see one." I told him about the arranged objects and the woven branches. "That's tool use," he said. "Complex tool use. If what you're saying is true, you're dealing with something as intelligent as a chimpanzee, but much larger and much stronger. What do I do?" "Be careful. Very careful. Chimps can be unpredictable, and they're only 150 pounds. Something as big as you're describing could kill you without meaning to." I went back the next morning. I know it was stupid, but I had to know more. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, an unknown primate species in the Virginia mountains. Or it could be the end of my life. I brought better equipment this time: a telephoto camera lens, a sound recorder, and 2 radios in case one failed. I also brought something else: a bag of apples and some nuts. If this thing was as intelligent as Dr. Harrison thought, maybe I could communicate with it. The forest was different in daylight. Less scary, but also less real. In the harsh light of morning, the woven branches just looked like storm damage. The arranged objects could have been the work of hikers playing a prank, but the footprints were still there, and they were real. I followed them deeper into the woods than I'd gone before. The tracks led up a steep hillside to an area I'd never explored. The trees were older here, bigger. Some of the oaks looked like they'd been growing for 200 years. I found more shelters in the trees. Not just one, but several. They were all woven from branches, all at least 15 feet off the ground. Some were small, maybe 6 feet across. Others were huge, big enough for something 12 feet tall to sleep in. This wasn't just one animal. This was a family. I set up my camera with the telephoto lens and settled down to wait behind a fallen log. The sound recorder was running. I scattered the apples and nuts in a small clearing about 50 yards away. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then I heard voices. Not human voices, but not animal sounds either. Low grunts and soft calls that sounded almost like conversation. The sounds were coming from different directions, like several individuals talking to each other across the forest. I looked through my camera lens toward the sound. Something was moving between the trees, something huge and covered in hair. Then another shape appeared from a different direction. And another. There were at least 4 of them. The largest was enormous, probably 9 feet tall and built like a bodybuilder. The others were smaller, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. One looked like it might be young, staying close to what was probably its mother. They moved toward them, a clearing where I'd left the food. The big male got there first. He examined the apples carefully, smelling them and turning them over with surprisingly gentle fingers. His hands were huge, but looked almost human. He made a soft calling sound, and the others approached. They shared the food, with the adults making sure the young one got its share. They didn't just eat like animals. They took turns. They communicated about who should eat what. I was watching a family. I took pictures until my camera ran out of film. The sound recorder captured 20 minutes of their calls and conversations. This was evidence that would change everything science thought it knew about North American wildlife. Then the big male looked directly at me. I was hidden behind the fallen log, 50 yards away, but somehow he knew exactly where I was. Those dark eyes locked onto mine through the camera lens. He stood up to his full height, at least 9 feet tall, and made a deep rumbling sound that I felt in my chest as much as heard with my ears. The other creatures immediately moved away from the clearing, but he didn't run. He walked toward me. Each step covered 6 or 7 feet. He moved with the smooth confidence of something that had never met anything it couldn't handle. As he got closer, I could see the details of his face, the intelligent eyes, the flattened nose, the way his mouth moved like he was trying to form words. He stopped about 20 feet away and squatted down, bringing his face closer to my level. We looked at each other in silence. I don't know what made me do it, but I slowly reached into my pack and pulled out one of the remaining apples. I rolled it across the ground toward him. He picked up the apple and examined it. Then he did something that nearly stopped my heart. He bit it in half and rolled one piece back to me. He was sharing food with me, just like he had with his family. I picked up the apple piece and took a small bite. It was the sweetest apple I'd ever tasted, probably because of what it meant. This creature, this unknown species, was treating me like a friend. We sat there for maybe 5 minutes, just looking at each other. I could see intelligence in his eyes, but also something else. Sadness, maybe. Like he knew what it meant that I'd found them. Then he made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and walked away. He moved through the forest without making any noise, disappearing between the trees like smoke. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, trying to understand what had just happened. I had proof that there were unknown creatures living in these mountains, creatures that were intelligent, that had families, that could choose to be gentle even though they were strong enough to tear me apart. But I also knew what would happen if word got out. Hunters would come. Scientists would come. The media would turn it into a circus. These creatures would never have peace again. I destroyed the photographs. It was the hardest decision I've ever made. Those pictures could have made me famous. They could have changed science. But they also would have destroyed the family I'd met in the forest. I kept the sound recordings, but I buried them in my files as unidentified wildlife vocalizations. To this day, they're labeled as probable bear sounds, even though I know better. I wrote my official report as bear activity, territorial marking observed, no danger to hikers. The arranged objects became storm damage. The woven shelters became unusual branch formations, possibly wind-related. Moses never asked me what I found, and I never told him. But sometimes when we run into each other in town, he gives me a look that says he knows I found something. He just nods and moves on. I've been back to Hollowback Mountain dozens of times in the past year. I've seen the creatures 3 more times, always from a distance, always watching me watch them. They know I could expose them, but they also seem to know I won't. I've started leaving apples in the same clearing every few weeks. They're always gone by the next day, and sometimes I find gifts in return. Interesting rocks, perfect pine cones, once a deer, antler that had been polished smooth. We have an understanding, the creatures and I. I protect their secret, and they let me study them from afar. I've learned that they migrate with the seasons, moving higher up the mountain in summer and lower in winter. I've seen evidence that they use tools, shaped stones for cracking nuts, sharpened sticks for digging roots. They're not monsters. They're not mythical creatures. They're just another species trying to survive in a world that's running out of wild places. But I worry about the future. More hikers are using these mountains every year. Development is creeping closer to their territory. How long before someone else sees them? Someone who won't keep the secret? I've set up an unofficial protection zone around their main territory. I route hiking trails away from their nesting areas. I report dangerous bear activity whenever I need to keep people away from sensitive spots. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the best I can do. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about Elena, my research partner who died 3 years ago. The official report said bear attack, but the creatures I've met don't seem capable of unprovoked violence. Elena was studying something else when she died, tracking unusual migration patterns, looking for evidence of unknown species. I think she found them first. I think she was trying to protect them, just like I am now. Last week I found something that confirmed my suspicions. Hidden in Elena's old research files was a single blurry photograph. a massive, hair-covered figure standing between two oak trees. On the back, she'd written, "They're not what people think. They're peaceful. They're scared. They need our help." She never had a chance to help them. But maybe I do. I'm writing this down as a record in case something happens to me. If you're reading this, it means I'm probably gone. But the creatures are still out there, still trying to survive in a world that doesn't understand them. They're not monsters. They're not legends. They're family groups of intelligent beings who just want to be left alone to live their lives in the deep woods they call home. If you ever encounter them, remember that they're more afraid of you than you are of them. Treat them with the respect you'd give any wild animal, but also with the understanding that they're capable of thought and emotion. And please, whatever you do, don't let the world know where to find them. Some secrets are meant to be kept. My name is Margaret Coldwater, and I'm the guardian of Hollowback Mountain. When I'm gone, I hope someone else will take my place. The howlers in the woods deserve to live free.